how's it going? Yeah, so I put up a post the other day of this little guy here, and in my infinite wisdom, I actually said, well, do you want to, hear more about it? Should I do another one of these videos? And one or two you said, yeah, sure, go for it. So here I am, giving it another go, chatting about how I made this, why I made this, what's the processes I go through to make it, what's the next processes after that, and maybe the inspiration and why horses and why form, why all these sort of things. So yeah, I get straight to it. I'll try and get a little bit shorter than the last one. Last one lasted like 15 minutes or so. Got it. When I start talking, it's very hard for me to stop. But anyway, so yeah, first of all, why a horse? Well, the honest answer is there's no particular reason why I've chosen to sculpt a horse. I don't have any particular affinity with the animal. I've rid the horse one or two times, and all I got was a sore arse. So it's not anything like that. But there's been times in the past where I've been asked to make a horse, and as a form, as a structure, as something to create a horse is a fascinating animal and creature to sculpt for many different reasons, which I'll go on to. But the first major time I sculpted a horse was a public art commission for Craigavon Borough Council back in the day, and went on to make casts off that piece. Which, if you've ever been to Hot Melt Forge or to my studio, you'll see the original horse still sits outside my shed. Maybe I'll stick a photograph up here to give you an idea of what it looks like. I've also made casts and moulds off that. So you put silicone rubber over the top and then took the rubber off and made wax versions and boss wax and cast on bronze and whatnot. Yeah, and I was interesting enough, I sold a few casts of that, which has been nice as well. I've done a few other little abstract versions of horses. Really, when I've done it was just do something different. Step away from the bulls for 5 minutes. Was kind of the idea, and I also thought, well, maybe people like horses, maybe people will buy horses. I don't know. Maybe it's as simple as that. Because at the time it wasn't really anything much beyond that. But I think when I'm saying things like that, I'm really putting myself down. It's not really entirely true, really. When you sculpt animals, when you sculpt people, you sculpt form and muscles and stuff like that, there is a whole process there which I do find intriguing, and when I do look at other people's work and feel that that's what I connect with other people's work too. But I'll walk you through the processes of this guy here. So first of all, it's not based on a particular type of horse. It's not based on a horse. It's not a portrait of a sheargar or anything like that there. Actually, basically what I did was I had the iPad I'm actually talking to now. I had a series of different photographs from different angles of different horses, different breeds, and it's kind of an amalgamation of all that. Basically took elements of different parts of the horse's features from different breeds, or basically different photographs I had, and kind of amalgamated it into a horse's head, which were all the different parts I found interesting and kind of worked together. And that's how you evolved. Now, once I was happy with the finish and the detail and that there, we're at the stage we're at now is I'm just letting it dry out a little bit. So it's still a wee bit soft, the clay. Once it's dry, then I'll put it's called silicone rubber over the top. So I'll mix the silicone, and then I'll just kind of pour it over it. And then after that, the plan is to put like a plaster. Almost imagine if you ever broke your arm, like a plaster cast in your arm. Put that type of plaster cast over the top of the rubber, and then you take off the plaster, you peel off the rubber, and then you put the rubber into the plaster, and then the idea will be you put wax into that, and you basically get a wax version of himself. Now, I may just cast that as is, and just to have one, exactly like the sculpture I made. But more than likely what I'll do, the plan is to abstract it and kind of break it up and to use various other different abstractive forms that I create through all the processes I mentioned in the last video, like throwing aluminium and wax form and doing all these various different things. So it's most likely do that, and then I will take those wax versions, those wax forms, cover that wax in it's called a ceramic shell casing. Basically, it's like this yellow goo, which is then you put sand in with this yellow goo, and then it goes hard, like like a retrieval, drunk from a cup of tea. So that's ceramic, ding. So it basically creates that ceramic by adding layers and layers and layers of sand, and it's suspended slurry is actually what it's called. And then eventually, after about 6 or 7 dips, you get like a hard shell, which then you melt out the wax. So the shell's covering the wax, and then you melt out the wax, and then you heat up the wax, and then you also you might have seen a video there the other day where I created where I was pouring the bronze. Well, that white shell, that white thing inside that used to be wax, and I might put the wee video up there of me pouring the bronze. But that little shell used to be wax, and the wax we melted out, and we pour in the bronze, and then we chip away the shell, and you're left with the bronze version of this, or whatever abstraction I tend to do. And that's the plan. Okay, and I'll put my granite base in below it and try and flog it. I've actually got a commission for a horse. That's one of the reasons. A horse head. That's one of the reasons I'm actually doing a horse head at the minute. So it's not like I'm trying to flog it. It's already flogged. You know what I mean? But yeah, hopefully I'll do different versions of it in the future, and I'll flog more. But so that's the vague plan with that, and that's the processes. So if you want to hear the pretentious bit, the arty-farty stuff, keep listening. If that's all you're interested in, is how I'm going to make it and all that, you can skip on now. Okay. So again, why a horse? Okay, as I said, there's no particular reason for a horse in general beyond the fact that it's a weird animal. It's a weird shaped animal. If you stand back and look at a horse, and it's got all these like long legs and a muscular structure, and when you see the thoroughbreds running and the races and whatnot, you can see the muscles go on and all interacting together, and kind of it's really fluid, incredible animal to do. But if you take the head on its own, for me, it's like something like Star Wars. Honest to God, it's just like a big long nose and but it's still a fascinating shape. It kind of lends itself to this kind of like fluid shape. So maybe put the front portrait of himself. Maybe turn him around even, so you can see how this kind of fluidly moves down, has a shape. What's interesting about it is, for me, when you do studies of people, studies of animals, and you're trying to actually get it really accurate, almost like a Renaissance type sculpture, you don't just create a form and then chip away at it. The way you want to think about these things is you want to think in your head about the bone structure and where the bone structure is. So for us, like the cheekbones, the forehead, all that sort of stuff. But for the horse, it's really these bone structures down here and then out and across. And like that. So you have to get that fundamentally right to start off with, because that's the base, that's the skeleton, that's the core, that's everything else kind of is fluid and moves from that. So then you have your muscles after that. So and then the skin and whatnot from that. So for me, when I'm the work I really love is the work of like Caravaggio and some of the Renaissance sculptors, and some modern sculptors like Eric Arneson, guys like that there, and then the old state like Michelangelo and back in the day and all that. But it's not necessarily so. Some people looking at that, maybe art historians or just your lay person looking at art, will just get caught up in the poetry of this type of work. What they're trying to say, or some sort of mythical, whatever was going on with that stuff. That's what they might want to get from that, and want the art to tell a story. But me as a sculptor, what I see is fluidity and form. I see that again, these bones and muscles kind of interacting together. So if you get, like, for example, you get a sculpture which, I'll maybe stick one up here for an example, where you actually get different people kind of interacting with each other, and you can see the bones hanging on to the muscles, and the muscles reacting to the force and all that. So there's a whole action of movement within that. So even if you did it your own hand, you can imagine doing this, and you just look at the muscles in there and the tendons and all that. So when you see all that moving in fluid form, for me that's fascinating. An artist who can truly capture that, that's the elite to me. Like, you know, these guys, they know what they're at. It's like a level of observation that becomes intuitive to the point where when they're trying to create something beyond that, a piece of art or a big piece of sculpture, when you have that level of understanding of form, well then it then lends itself to more fluid and more interactive and more intuitive sculpture from there. I think if you master that, you've got the core to go on and do whatever you need to in sculpture. So for me, when I'm doing the likes of him, I want to get all that carry on correct. And also, you may have seen some of my older pieces, like one I did, I think it was last year. If you remember your man doing all this, again, I'll probably stick a photograph up here of him. But for me, it was all about the bones and the muscles and how they interact and all that sort of stuff. And it was really important for me to do that type of sculpture, because I needed to, I'll be honest with you, I was hoping to sell that type of work, but it's not everybody's cup of tea, you know, man doing that. Like, it's a very, very niche sell. But for me, it was important to do, because I need to understand, when I'm doing figurative forms, I need to understand how to play with the form, play with the muscles, and how they do all the things I'm just trying to do, to explain. If you can understand that, then it can lead on to other things. So again, this is what we're trying to do with the horse, and this is why we do the in-depth study of all the muscles and all this carry on, you know. Because once you can see how a muscle or a tendon comes down, then if I'm going to break it up and restructure it, then I know where to break, and I know where to add, and I know where to do that. And also, without doubt, like if I'm sculpting that, if you leave a little bit of detail within that piece, then you know you will also have people respect detail. People respect the art in that form. People respect draftsmanship, if you know what I mean, in detail. And some people find it boring. That's fair enough. Sometimes I find it boring too. If it's too detailed, not really doing much, you know, it can be a bit boring. So you need a bit of emotive connection with it. So at the minute, he looks cool, but you know, I could have made it a lot simpler. You know, most horses you don't see the muscles in here. They're a bit hairier, you know, hairier foreheads. The hair's in different places, but you know, if you bring more detail into that, it adds a little bit more presence, a little bit more energy and whatnot, and then you can work on from there. But yeah, so that's my starting point. So let's see how it goes, you know. I'll try and record and take more, you know, I'll record more my processes as I create this, and sure, we'll go from there. Anyway guys, if you have any questions, you'll ask me anything that you want to, you know, want me to do any more of these type of videos, let me know, comment, do all that stuff. You know the stuff you see here people saying on YouTube, you know, like, subscribe, all that sort of stuff. But honestly, if you want to interact, chat to me about all this sort of stuff, it actually helps me, you know what I mean? So it helps me think about my work. Actually, you know, sometimes, you know, to just go off on a little tangent, you know, as a dyslexic person, like, you don't always articulate what you're trying to, you visualise in your head. Do you know what I mean? So you think visually, you think in images, where a lot of people think in words and statements and stuff like that, but as a dyslexic, you think with, you know, stories in pictures. Do you know what I mean? So that may mean, if I was going to write that down, you know, of an image, imagine yourself, like, you see like a really emotive thing in a movie, okay? That's how we, as an artist and dyslexia, whatever we want to do, that's what we try to capture within art. But then go and sit down and write that down and articulate what you just seen in that movie, and do it in an interesting, informative way. That's not always easy. So when people actually ask me questions, chat back and forth, I find, because I don't mind talking, I find it brings out a stronger understanding of what that image, that little movie clip I was trying to create with my work. So by all means guys, if you've got to this length in the video and you're still watching, God love you, but if you're still watching, feel free to drop a wee comment. Anyway guys, thanks very much. I'll chat to you again someday.